All right, welcome to day 2 of CornCon. We have Winn Schwartau zooming in from Nashville. And Winn, yes, we have some of Winn's books out here. We're going to have Q&A, be interactive with Winn as best we can, and give away some books. And Winn's going to be speaking today on security is probabilistic, not deterministic. Get over it. Okay, so Winn, I'll let you take it away.
Well, thank you, John. I wish I could be there. I don't know if John mentioned I was in California and ended up with smoke inhalation, and smoke inhalation symptoms are identical to COVID. So that got really exciting for a while. And I'm sorry I couldn't be there, but hopefully next year. This talk is going to be a little bit geeky. And the whole point is for you to start thinking a little bit differently about security. And I know you've heard that from me over the years, and I'm going to stick to it. Thinking differently is the only way we're going to get anything done well. I'm an engineer. I grew up an engineer. My father worked on radar systems during World War II. My mother was the first audio engineer at NBC. I started my first TV repair business at 5. And this is the world I grew up in, was looking at things from an engineering standpoint. And then I got involved in the professional audio video, the family business, if you will, and got involved with complex systems very, very early in my career. And I guess the whole complex systems thing has really stuck with me over the years to be able to have a slightly different view. And I have a lot of axioms that I like to use, and one of the big ones is infinity. Infinity is why network security has failed, and I'm going to walk you through a look at security, if you will, from a probabilistic view, where infinity does not exist, where there is no zeros, no ones, therefore digital is not binary. If anybody wants to talk, you can have it, and there's also a PDF that I can send to anybody who wants it, with all of the rules of how all of this stuff works, with probably too much math that you really don't want. So the real question is there such a thing as security? And I am coming more and more to the conclusion that security does not exist really in any form. And one of the reasons behind that is, can we define security? And unless you can define and measure something very, very carefully, its existence becomes somewhat more obtuse. It's not quite as clear as something that's very hard and binary, if you will, a 0 or a 1. But what is security? There's lots of different viewpoints, lots of different angles. And I've decided over the years to really look at security from a completely different view and say, security, let's pretend that word doesn't exist. Let's just say there is no such thing as security. But what would replace it, or what can we use? And I'm going to use trust. And trust I'm going to use because it is relational. If you have one object, whether it's a human system, a biological system, or a mechanical system, if you have one object, there can be, the trust is meaningless. It doesn't mean a thing, because in order to have trust, you have to have a relationship of some sort between objects or subjects, depending upon how you want to look at it. And whether you're in the physical domain, the cyber domain, or the human domain, trust is still about how these relationships work. So if you don't have any trust, then we can't even talk about security. So I want to look at it much more from the abstract meta view of looking at things from a trust. Now, I'm going to ask a question of the audience, and you can just shout it out. Just shout it out so I don't have to see you. When you go out for a drive, are you 100% absolutely positive you're not going to be in an accident? Good. I love that. I didn't understand a damn word, but I'm saying I think I heard hell no. Was that about right? Yeah. All right. Cool. Thanks. So the odds, if you're going to be in an accident, the odds have to be greater than 0 because it's trust relationship. And it's going to be less than 1 because you can't be 100% positive that you're not going to be in one. So that is probabilistic in the kinetic sense. All right. Are you 100% positive the plane won't crash? Hell no. Okay, that's what I'm hearing. And well, probably not, because we got some really good technology up there. But statistically speaking, probabilistic speaking, it's still somewhere between 0, because you have to have a relationship, and 1, because we're never going to be 100% positive. 100% positive you're not going to get COVID, even though you're all vaxxed up.
Hell no.
Right, more hell no's. So again, it's somewhere, it's a probabilistic thing. That's what we've been learning for 2 years about all of this, and a probabilistic and statistical analysis of the odds of getting COVID. And the same sort of thing can be thought about odds of your network being infected, odds of a phishing or a social engineering attack working. There are no absolutes at all. How many of you would take this ride? Oh, another oh hell no. Whoever that lady is, you got it. You're owning the audience. That's great. Because you come through. I don't think I would take this, because I've got to absolutely trust that 5 fools on that ride are not going to start moving back and forth to think it's funny to miss that leap. Again, the loop safety, somewhere between 0 and 1. And trust is never absolute, as I'd mentioned. So, so there's a trust spectrum, and I don't want to get into all the details of what it could be or not be, because ultimately when we're talking about trust, it tends to be situational. And regardless of the situation, regardless of the domain, the human, physical, or cyber domains, you're still going to have somewhere between 0 and 1. Now, interestingly enough, when you look at relational trust, it tends up mathematically, and I'm not going to go into too much math in the early part of this. It's basically the inverse of risk. Risk is as definable as trust, or indefinable as trust is, because it's all about what we have done for many, many years in our field, looking at things from a risk standpoint, but never examining it from the standpoint of how can I construct, how can I look at networks, how can I look at relationships by building in trust. We say we're building in security. That's been the mantra for a long time. And I'm not sure that that has been as successful as we would like. And perhaps it's a matter of nomenclature and ultimately some math at the end of this. So everything in the world is an approximation, period. End the story. We could have a nice beer and explore some of the abstract stuff, but I'm going to stick with everything is an approximation. Okay, on the left upper, that's a sine wave. What is the thing on the bottom? Anybody know what that is on the bottom left? Sorry?
Digital version of the sine wave.
I didn't hear all the words, but I'm going to say Barry's wrong. Anybody know what that is? It's called a square wave. And in its most pure form, it goes from a 0 to a 1. But there is no such thing as a square wave, because a square wave, if it was mathematically perfect, would be divide by 0, because you've got an infinite tangent line, and it takes time. So when you look at the right-hand side here of square waves, when you zoom in and look carefully, they're really approximation curves, and it's about granularity. And unless we're going to go into the quantum world, everything instantaneity means absolutely nothing. So square waves, while we like to think that they're absolute, while we like to think that a 0 and a 1 are absolute in our digital trains, they are really approximations even in the digital world, which is why we have error correction and all sorts of stuff built into it for this exact reason. Now, let's look at physics. Physics has 2 types of physics, roughly. You have the Newtonian physics, classic physics, which is highly deterministic. And everybody uses the pool table example that if you hit the cue, you know exactly where it's going to go if your measurements are precise enough. And you can look forward in time, and you can look backwards in time as well in order to be able to analyze events and event trains. And that is largely in the macro level, absolutely deterministic within measurably down to 10 to the minus 12th, something like that. However, at the quantum scale, everything suddenly changes, and without going into all the quantum mechanics, ultimately, we cannot be deterministic about all of our observations of quantum phenomena. And ultimately, it is a probabilistic view of the universe. And when we look at some of the phenomena that occurs, yes, time travel exists at the quantum level, but not very often and not collated enough to be able to become a macro event as far as we understand the physics today. There are anti-entropic types of events that occur in the quantum world that we can see, we observe, they're mathematically and physically, we know they exist, but they don't bubble up to the macro world. So we tend to say, okay, it's still deterministic, but strictly speaking, it is not. Quantum computing, for all of the talk that we hear about it, is probabilistic. And when we look at the errors that are built into it, into quantum computing, because of second law of thermodynamics, we have incredible amounts of noise in the system. And that requires massive error correction. And again, the amount of accuracy is a probabilistic determination that ultimately Feynman came up with some of the infinite summation of integrals way back in the 50s and 60s when he postulated how quantum computing could actually work. So when you do a quantum problem, you're not going to get exact answers. You're going to get probabilistic answers based upon all sorts of accuracy and functions and the engineering that goes into it. Now, Purdue is working on another system, and if you're interested in it, they're looking at probabilistic computers that will operate at room temperature, because a probabilistic computer is often close enough. So when I'm building in my old career an electronic circuit and I need it to be really good quality, how accurate do my resistors and my components need to be? Do they need to be 10 to the minus 9th accurate, or is 10 to the minus 3rd good enough for the application? And so Purdue and folks in Japan are working on looking at quantum-ish kinds of hard problems. But what is the accuracy that is really required in order to come up with an acceptable answer that will provide something meaningful for the engineers and scientists? Our brains are probabilistic. I was having a conversation this morning with a friend of mine about 9/11, because we were both supposed to be doing some work in New York, and his memory is somewhat different than my memory on a lot of the specifics, because the brain conflates things, it confuses things, because we are probabilistic machines. We average things, we weight things, and weighting is so strictly important in any sort of neural network, deep learning networks, machine learning networks. And I won't use the word AI because I don't believe AI exists, and I'm not sure AI ever will exist. It's a great marketing term that's meant to confuse people that are non-technical. But neural networks are all probabilistic as well. There's weighting factors. And you may remember several years ago, Microsoft put out a new Twitter bot of some sort, and suddenly within 24 hours, it became very racist. Reason is the weighting factors, the probabilistic inputs that weighted the functions inside the neural networks got skewed by users screwing with the system. So anytime we're using any sort of ML, NL, or even CNNs, when we're looking at deep learning networks and convolutional networks for learning, they all are probabilistic. And often when you ask some of these machines, especially those that have not been fully trained yet, you ask them a question and you get an answer. That answer is probabilistic. Now you ask the same question right again, 10 minutes later, whatever, you are very likely, depending upon other interactions with that system that are hidden from your view and hidden from the network layers down in those inside the networks, which are often thousands and thousands of layers deep, you're going to get a different answer. So being very careful about what we expect from the systems in terms of queries is something I think that we failed at in security, because I think we've been asking many times the wrong questions. Gambling is probabilistic, like Doe, but we understand standard deviations. We understand how these curves work. But in security, we're still looking for what? How secure are we? And I'm arguing that question may be very, very meaningless. In the analog world, slide rules, they were invented in the 1600s in order to be able to quickly solve logarithms and then have applications into calculus. The answers on, I grew up on slide rules, designing circuits with them, and the answers are close enough. Yet the Chinese came up with an early digital system where they could get very, very accurate numbers to however many decimal points you were going to have on either side. And how they do that, I don't know, but it is rather amazing. Close enough with analog systems. How close is close enough versus being digital, expecting an exact answer? And the analog systems, the one on the left, a lot of this is fire control systems. The military's been involved with this since the early 1900s. Fire control systems, various types of military guidance systems, camera systems, bombing sites, they're all analog because they're faster, they interface with sensors better, and they're close enough. So there was all industry of analog computers for many, many years where the answers could be good enough for the application. Do you need 6 sigma, 9 sigma? What do you need in terms of accuracy? And I built an analog computer way, 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 way long time ago and used it actually to do some math and next to my TI-45, and it's working on the analog computer was so much faster. And again, it gave me answers that were good enough. So is your network secure? Well, no, of course not. Now we got to get into some of the maths of how we could look at networks and then apply a little bit of mathematics and probabilistic thinking to come up with some approaches that are not maybe intuitively obvious. So is your marriage secure? Well, there's a curve for that. And that curve is based upon histories and statistics. The same thing that we've got with COVID. Statisticians use probabilistics in order to be able to come up with answers. The entire insurance industry, which is a big gamble as well, that is completely probabilistic and statistically based. So much of the universe that we live in day to day is based upon the fundamental natures of probability, and some estimates say more than 50% of the planet's GNP is based upon this type of thinking. Yet I'm arguing in security, maybe we're not doing that so well. So let's take an example here. And here comes some math, and I'm really sorry, but I'm going to keep it as simple as I possibly can. We're going to look at a basic probability relationship. Probability of D, real simple. It's the probability that we detected an attack. Now, the probability, keep in mind, is greater than 0 and less than 1, somewhere in that range. And so you could have, let's say, 0.5. Okay, that'd be a 50-50 chance, just like with throwing dice. I'm sorry, with red blacks on cards, or dice on a 1 to 3 or a 4 to 6, 50-50 relationships, pretty straight ahead. Now, depending upon how accurate I want to be, I could say that probability of D is 0.555. So I've got 3 significant digits of accuracy there. That is immaterial to discussion. So we're going to keep it really very simple and just use very simple numbers here. So probability of detection. And when we talk about detection devices, the black boxes that the vendors are selling us, do they really talk about that? And we're going to look at what some of this actually means. Now, so the probability of detecting attack, PD. Now, what is the probability of that attack actually being in progress? Separate question. And probability, because it's relationship is relational, we have to look at the value of PD detection given that the attack is actually occurring. Am I getting pinged by anybody? No, I thought that was Gordon. So the value of D based upon A is the probability that the detection, PD, was actually occurring, PA. And underneath of there is the math. That's it. It's very, very simple. It's multiplication and division. And that's all you really need to know. Now, let's take a look at some numbers in this. So let's say the vendor says his detection accuracy is 99%. All right. Let's ignore how he comes up with that number, or he justifies it to ignore that. So now let's say, again, that 1 in 1,000 emails coming into your organization are malicious, or it's taking you to a bad place. And it's just, it's a number that we're picking here, because when you're dealing with probabilities, you have to start with an initial set of conditions and then work upon new data as it comes along. So the probability that this is all happening is actually 1.1%. However, when we look upon it, is the probability of the attack being real based upon what the vendor's black box product accuracy tells us, what happens? The math confuses us. It makes no intuitive sense, but it comes down to, for a single detection, a single event, we're sitting around 9% accuracy. 9%. Vastly different, because we have to look at it over a period of time. Now, let's take a second event. And the second event, same math, same conditions. What happens? Well, based upon that, and if the events are correlated and the events occur the same way, our accuracy now goes up to 90%. And over time, and this is why people like to train ML systems and neural networks, over time, the accuracy can increase. But we also have some other conditions that are going to make it a little bit harder to look at. There's a thing called ROC, and it was all based upon accuracy of radar detection for airplanes and sea stuff, and it all came from the military in World War II. And it's how accurate is my data? And this is where vendors, I'm not entirely comfortable with a lot of the data they give me about their detection stuff. There's 4 possible conditions that'll exist in a detection network, whether you're talking about probability of D detection or probability of the attack occurring. And first one, TP, true positive. Yep, that was an accurate detection. Got it, absolutely. FP, false positive. And that means we detected an attack, but it wasn't real. And typically that requires some level of human intervention, depending upon how you have your systems and SIMs configured. Then we have false negative and true negative as well. And all of these are the 4 possibilities of what happens with an event detection. So it is obviously not a binary condition, because all of these numbers are going to consistently change. And they can be plotted out very, very simply in what's called ROC space. And if you look over on the right, that's taking some random data just to show where the ideal conditions are. And you want your sensitivity to be more accurate over time, more samples, and that's in the upper left quadrant, and down in the lower right, things get a whole lot worse. So there is no real simple just, yeah, I'm going to detect it 99% of the time. No, we have to look at those based upon the relational probabilistic conditions of other events and other data sets that we've got in our networks. So let's look at a real simple network here. And we've got 3 nodes. Okay, so we have the 3 nodes A, B, C, and each of those nodes has a trust factor. And these are made up numbers to show you how the systems apply here. And these are just easy numbers. So the most trusted one is A. That's 99%. We really trust A. Boy, they're great. And then B and C are, they're okay, but not great. So then we look at the relationships between them and look at those trust factors. So let's look at C and B. C only trusts B to slightly less than half. for whatever reason, again, we're just showing some of the math here, and B, for whatever reason, trust C only 20%, only 20, which is very, very low, despite the fact that C gives itself an 80% confidence factor of accuracy, which means when you add all this up, and there's all the math down there, this 3-node simple network now has a trust factor of just over 50%. Now, what happens when I add, and I'm not going to pour you through the math, what happens when I add another node and another node and another node? Now I got 10,000 nodes. Now I got 100,000 nodes. Now I got iPhones. Now I got all this crap tying to my network all over the world. And all of these object trust factors and relational trust factors have a severe impact based upon some simple probabilistic math on the overall integrity of my network. Now, let's just mentally do a little bit of math here. If I've got various levels of trust with people, we're going to take the people example here, and you want to hire somebody to be your trusted insider. Well, is there such a thing as a trusted insider? Maybe, maybe not. That really depends. So when you're hiring somebody, how do you establish trust? And this is just one example of how trust can be used. And this could be about a human, it could be an object, it could be a system, it could be a partner network, it could be any object at all in the networking relational environment. And in this case, okay, what do I care about? My weighting factors are going to apply. How much do I really care about each one? So technical competence. Oh yeah, I want a whole lot of technical competence. Yeah. And my past job history matters, and references. And okay, I got a psychological profile and commitment, life goals. But when you apply weighting factors to it, is how much do these really matter? How much do you care about technical competence versus other factors? And then you end up with a weighted value, which gives you a trust factor there. Now, over in case 2, let's see, we care less about technical competence and much more about, commitment, a lot about all your past illegal behavior, job history. Now, we may not agree with that, but what ends up happening is that the weighted value ends up with a completely different trust factor if you're looking, in this case, to put somebody into an administrative control place. So things are going to change over time as well. But in this case, or in any case at all, you're going to end up having a weighted network that's going to change its value, meaning your answers going in, your answers coming out over time. So now let's take a look at how this would happen in an administrative world, or any point where you want additional security. So ultimately, we have an awful lot of organizations that say, okay, we need 2 administrators or 3 administrators to operate the same system, because one guy can't do it 24/7, 365. So we can look at what happens when we add additional people, in this case for the 2-man rule. And if either Bob or Alice in this case can affect something, in this case, it's a simple OR gate. We look at it logically, of course. The math says that as soon as I have both, either Bob or Alice can do it, but both are trusted to the level of 90%. We trust Bob 90%. We trust Alice 90%. But as soon as we put them into the same network and either one of them can have control, suddenly the math shows us that we're down to an 81% trust. We've lost an awful lot of trust, and our risk factor has virtually almost doubled in this particular case. So when you end up with a lot of OR conditions, so for example, in multiple admins having controls over a particular system, the trust factor starts going down very, very quickly the more people I have that can affect a particular system. Same thing with multiple inputs to a decision-making matrix of any sort. And you say, well, if A, if B, or C, or D, how much do I trust the output, in this case Q? The same thing occurs. If I have multiple options on the inputs, what's my trust factor at the end? And the math says, whoa, You can't do it this way with any high level of integrity. So the two-man rule can operate in another way, which is with an AND gate that both A and B, Alice and Bob, both have to agree to make a decision. And whether Alice is a process and Bob is a process, or their networks, or whatever the decision matrix is, they both have to be there and they both have to agree. And suddenly, under those rules, my trust factor has gone up by an order of magnitude. And that is tremendous when we look at how we can configure relational objects in a network in order to make trust, hopefully building that in versus building security in. And then there's all sorts of logic that comes out of this as well, because you have to have the time in it. Time is a function that is required, because if we have Alice and Bob having to make the same decision and agree on something, well, what if Bob is out to lunch and can't agree with Alice? Well, what if Bob's on vacation, can't agree with Alice? So there's a whole time function that can be implemented using feedback and creating a different type of logic gate called the time-based flip-flop, which shows how the logic works over the spectrum of time in order to not allow the Alice and Bob relationships to create bottlenecks in the systems. Now, we can also adjust probability of this and the trust factor by adjusting time in any of these arguments. And again, it's super simple math. There is nothing complicated. It is multiplying, dividing, adding and subtracting. That is it, with some simple formulas. And what ends up happening, if you look over on the right, that when I change the value of time, and the time value goes from I have to agree within 1 second, I have to agree in 100 seconds, or I have to agree in 700 seconds. What ends up happening is the trust factor gets adjusted and the risk factor goes up and or down depending upon the amount of time that I allow each individual relationship to exist and to continue with whatever decision has been made. Again, it's not complicated. It's just a matter of thinking it through in a completely different way. One of the arguments I've made for many years is the concept of detection in depth. I made the point earlier about probably your plane's not going to crash, and with a really good reason that the engines, the GE engines, are the ones that I have incredible respect for. Each of those big engines, the 9000 series on our planes, they've got roughly 5,000 detection points in them that are sampling at a minimum of once every second to look at the behavior of that engine. And the reason it's done is probabilistically, it allows us to predict the future. So if those engines sense something odd here, something odd here, something odd here, that's causing a flag to the main part of the intelligence and says, well, wait a minute, we may have to shut this engine down because statistically X, Y, Z could happen. This is the same approach I'm advocating for portions of our network, and especially for coding, that the relationships are changing so quickly, just like in an engine. They do allow us to predict the future. And the more sensors we have, the detection mechanisms, and the more often I update that sensor information, and the more that I've gotten those probabilistic relationships, creating a data set, actuarial tables, if you will, the more accurate I'm going to be able to predict the future. So what does all this look like? Well, you can actually graph it out and look at how your trust factor, maybe you want to call it the security of your network, or security of components of your network, are going to look over time. And the one on the far left, what's happening is the way that network is configured, as I have no breaches, I have no negative events occurring, the overall baseline for the trust factor increases over time. And that was a decision that was made when the tables are built on how your trust mechanisms are going to work. In the middle one, we have where we want to keep our trust very, very high. So it's not allowed to fall through the baseline very often. The one on the upper right, It's not so important. We can periodically revet it. We can do that, the time-based feedback in it. But if it goes down really low for a while, that circuit is not all that critical. Then the one in the lower left is mission critical, because we look at the number of significant digits that are sitting there, and it's like, whoa, damn, that's what, 10 to the minus, well, there's the numbers, 10 to the minus 10th, 10 to the minus the 11th. And then we had to invent a nomenclature to be able to have it make sense. And this creates a very narrow band, a very granular band of, I want everything operating within this narrow band. I'm never going to hit one, never going to be perfect, but I can keep raising that bar by keeping that band of trust exceedingly small. When we apply this mechanism to a time analysis, we end up with a different set of equations, which are pretty simple. And basically it says, if you are able to operate your network, your code base, your relational networks, human, cyber, or physical, such that your detection mechanisms are running faster than your adversary's ability to attack, and the adversary is going to use the same probabilistic math, he's just going to use it upside down using the unknown estimates of what you're capable of doing in those equations. If you can operate faster than he can, you're going to win. However, the reason we're losing so much of this is because of the binary thinking, and we're not looking at it from a time base, that the time base says, if my ability to detect, react, mitigate any of these systems is slower than my adversary, we lose. Very, very simple math, very simple probabilistic analysis, and it's something that we have not bothered to do. Now, you don't need to know this math. You don't need to be able to run these equations. There are no magic tools that are invented yet that you can plug this stuff into. Maybe somebody out there wants to write one. Please, I'm happy to help. But you need someone on your team. You need someone, every company needs somebody in your team to start being able to look at the relational dynamics over time of networks, network components, or anything that has multiple relationships into it. Some takeaways, and some of them are good, some of them are not so good. Your network's never going to be secure, period, end of story. There's cyber insurance, and there's boating insurance, there's airplane travel insurance, and all of that is because there is no absolutes, and we've been treating it completely wrong. You can calculate the trust factors. You're going to nail it on day one? No, because that's a dart throw on day one. Over time, you're going to be able to, by using these approaches, really get very, very accurate and be able to then notice changes to that accuracy by visualization in this case. Got to keep in mind that trust is not static. It changes over time, and trust degrades over time, because unless there is a re-verification, a re-vetting of that trust, we end up with Aldrich James and Robert Hansen and these guys, and sitting sweet and pretty inside of CIA, FBI, or inside of our networks, whether it's a human doing social engineering or the remnants of some hostile code that's sitting in there that is available to the bad guys. Thing I'm going to ask you to do is really believe in the math. Science really doesn't care what you think or you believe. Science does kind of like mathematics. And an awful lot of this is pretty straight ahead looking at networks. You got to keep in mind that if nothing else, network security, and I call it, it's a bear. And this is the old story. There's a couple hunters and they're out, and along comes a bear and they start running. And the first guy's running, tearing ass. And the second guy sits down and he's changing from his heavy boots into some running sneakers. And the first guy says, God, well, what's wrong with you? Well, you got to run. Otherwise you can't outrun the bear. I don't care. I don't have to outrun the bear. I just have to outrun you. And that's, so the velocity of the hunter has got to be less than the velocity of the bear, which is less than the velocity of Hunter 2. And then you can guess, or you can look at who's going to win and lose in that one. So what can you do now? You can measure your detection. I'll give you the tools to do it. You can measure your reaction. You can measure all of these things. The circuits exist. The mathematics exist to be able to start getting a handle. Don't do the whole thing. You got to start somewhere small to be able to get comfortable with the process. That's a repeat of my axioms that I've been living with now for many, many years, as John and a lot of you know. And so it's all in there. Please buy it. Oh yeah, it's on Kindle as well now. So it's like, I think $10 on Kindle. All my other books are free if you're interested in any of those. And thanks very much. Again, I really wish I could have been there for this, but you can actually hear my voice still sort of going. John, over to you.
That's great, man. Thank you so much. Let's give a round of applause for Winn. Is there any questions from our audience here? All right. Who'd like
I got to make this bigger.
We got the book. We got books over here. Grab a book, and next time you see Winn next year, they'll sign it for you. I expect you to have a new book next year, right, man?
John, I've told you I am not writing any more books. I am done writing books.
I thought you were going to be the ghostwriter for my autobiography.
The last book took 19 years, so no. But thank you for the thought.
All right. Well, thanks again, Winn. And attendees, we are going to start in track 10 minutes late in track 3, and I'm just about to go over and get track 2 started. So thanks a lot.